All right, welcome on to a very special, only twice a year actually, do we do this crossover episode, and we're going to talk about the top 10 prospects in the NBA. And just to give you guys a little idea of the criteria, this is players who are 23 and under. According to Basketball Reference, that means that they do not turn 24 before February 1st of this year. And I guess we can just talk about how some of our criteria here going in. Let's start with you, John, of just what you're really looking at for ranking these guys below Victor Wembanyama, who will be number one.
Well, just to clarify for people who followed me, Vit Krejci turned 24 this year, so is not eligible to be ranked on this top 10.
Vitkor Wembanyama.
But James Wiseman is still eligible. But
is Smiley still eligible?
In my heart,
he might be. He was really young. I don't know if you know, he was in the G League at 18. They hit him there. Actually, no one knew that he was playing in the G League. Hopefully, the people we talk about.
And if he's there right now, still nobody knows.
Well, and I'll clarify that one of the things that's different about prospects versus the other rankings that we do is this is not 1 year starting today. This is more over the life of their career. And but another really important thing here is that, at least for me, but I think at least Nate, and I believe John is like this too, is that there are a variety of outcomes that are possible for all of these players, even the ones who seem more certain than others. But something that I prioritize is those real upside possibilities. Do you have a chance of being All-NBA, first-team All-NBA, MVP, that type of stuff? That is a lot more valuable than a player who is a very good starter and will probably always be a very good starter, because they can do that. And then the other huge factor that matters in here for me, positional scarcity, and then how versatile is your situation? How versatile is your game? Because we're not evaluating how great is Franz Wagner on the Magic. It's, if you were building a team, how would you use him? How would he fit in? How would he not fit in? And so there are certain players who are in very favorable situations who you have to consider that. And there are some who are in unfavorable situations where you have to consider that.
Yeah. And for age 23, the reason I chose that is that's the last year you could be like, well, he's only 23. Like, the sky's the limit for this guy. Like, once another year passes, you're pretty much completely locked into your fate. No, we had to pick a year but that was kind of the one that I chose, where you feel like there are still a lot of paths available to the guy. Obviously, there have been instances in NBA history where guys develop later, but usually you got a pretty decent idea of what a guy is going to be like by the time he gets off of this list. Although some of the guys who graduated, we feel differently about.
And Nate, I think that the graduation is a good thing to talk about. Just kind of give you an idea of, well, who was 23 on the list last year and thus ineligible. So for me, Tyrese Halliburton, Tyrese Maxey, Zion Williamson, who I'm thankful we didn't have to rank him this year. Those were the guys who fell off that I had in the top 10 last year.
Yeah, John, anything else to add before we crown Victor Wembanyama?
I think you said it all.
All right, well, let's get to work on Victor Wembanyama then. And what do you make so far? I mean, is there even the slightest doubt that it's him to you guys a year and a quarter in?
The only thing that would give me pause is a thing that has not yet come to pass in his career, but is this thing that would still give you a little bit of pause, which is the career health record of guys of this size. If he plays 1,000 career games, he will be the first guy of this size to do it.
Yeah, but that said, like, he's probably thinner than almost all those guys. He hasn't really had any kind of issues that would make you particularly concerned so far. I would say relative to when he was drafted, I feel more positively about that now, given how well he's made it through to this point.
I would agree with that, and also because in the offseason he's playing for the French national team and not the Chinese national team.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Wembanyama, it seems like he's taking good care of his body. It's they're all of those sorts of things. And for me, the reason why Wembanyama is a clear number one is that and this is kind of guy ties in. We just sometimes talk about development scores. Is that last year when we recorded this, we loved his defensive potential. Well, he ended up being, I picked him, I think, second in defensive player of the year last year. I have him first right now. And so that means you have a player who's already there. I would love to have a brief conversation with you guys about what he would be as a playoff defender right now, were he on that kind of a team. I think he'd do pretty well. I don't think he'd, I'm not sure he'd be like Anthony Davis on that Lakers bubble title run, but because you remember, we're thinking about this player in a different situation, but I do think that his game would translate reasonably well against the best of the best defensively.
Yeah, that would be interesting because he's not really a great defensive technician right now, but he just is still having these amazing defensive numbers. 43% field goal percentage allowed at the rim, which is just about as good as you're ever going to see. And the Spurs are just so much better defensively when he's on the floor. 8.3 points, 100 better when he's on the floor. I have him as my defensive player of the year now. I had him as an all-NBA player when we did it at the end of November. So I think of all the guys on this list, he's actually playing the best right now. That might be a controversial opinion for when we get into the later guys, and he's still has 2 years to go. And the upside obviously is an unprecedented sort of player. John, what do you make of his offense so far? I think it's pretty clear he's going to be a game-changing defensive force. He already is.
Yeah, offensively talented but frustrating right now. The thing that really stands out to me is that he has some passing ability that could be explored further, I think. He'll drop these like left-handed bounce passes off the dribble that, a lot of point guards don't have in their bag. And so there's an amazement factor with that. He is a capable shooter. He is not necessarily a great shooter, so I don't think just having him pick and pop.
But he's capable of getting it up at 9.9 per 36 from three.
Yeah, which is helpful, but I don't think just leaning on that is the optimal usage. I think actually Mitch Johnson has gotten him into more situations where he is working one-on-one on the block with some kind of advantage, or catching on the move, or doing something paintward, shall we say, that I think puts him in a better position to succeed. So I'm excited to see where that goes, especially as he continues to develop lower body strength. Not necessarily, you don't really want him to fill out too much, but just to get stronger in his base so that he can hold those positions a little better, get his shot up while being nudged and a little more effectively. And then I think, obviously, with his size, he can shoot over just about anyone.
Yeah, the most disappointing stat about Victor to me so far is that he is only 14th in the NBA in dunks right now. Now he's 10 behind the number 4 guy, but like that, he should be leading the league in dunks when you consider the ridiculous dunk radius that he has. He's just spending too much time in the perimeter and just not working as much as a play finisher. But they don't have a ton of shooting. They only really have one guy who gets in the ball particularly well, and Chris Paul. So my biggest concern about Victor Wembanyama not realizing his potential is just maybe the mentality of he just falls in love with the perimeter stuff too much. And I've generally loathed to levy that criticism, but I do think it's been a little bit the case so far. But he's raising his ceiling by having this, and he's starting to shoot the ball way better from 3 too. So he's raising his ceiling with this outside stuff, but he also may be lowering his floor.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Something that I've been thinking about with Wembanyama over the last 8 months is that I think it's less likely that he's going to be like the offensive fulcrum of a team the way that Jokic is. But I also don't particularly care, because the history of big men who are this great defensively is that they aren't that player, and it's too hard to burn the candle at both ends. But what I like about Wembanyama is that, as John was saying, the passing is interesting. And so if you play him on a team with more spacing, I think there are a lot of different ways that over the years Spurs coaches will be able to try to use him offensively. So you could do pick and pop stuff. You could do him kind of as a hub in certain extents. And then you could use him as an opportunity post player. I don't think you're going to do it as like an every down type of guy. And that's great. I think that unlike some of the other great defensive players, there is an offensive place for him. It's just not going to be necessarily a single box, at least not for a little while.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to add on him, John?
I don't have anything else. I mean, the real question with him is durability and can he get to like sustained MVP level performance? Those are our quote unquote doubts right now.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't play as hard as this guy because basically no one ever did. But does he top out as sort of like a KG like player, better shot blocker, maybe not as good on the perimeter, although he's like impossible to isolate against on the perimeter too, by the way. They keep him close to the rim, but when he gets switched out, like, he's going to be like blocking guys. Like he blocked Anthony Edwards.
I watched that game, and Ant embarrassed himself a couple of times trying to take Victor off the dribble and switches before he finally gave up.
Yeah. So the one hole to me in his game is ability to score one-on-one. If you're going to be really a top offensive player, you need that to some degree. But, does he settle in that sort of like KG, Anthony Davis, like that sort of archetype, but better shooter and better shot blocker, and probably better finisher around the rim, maybe even, although AD was unbelievable in that area and he still is.
Yeah.
Or is it like a guy, the passing, as you noted, is pretty intriguing, John. So, I mean, I think if he ever really gets to be someone where you have to double team him, it's going to be completely over for everybody. All right, John, I'll leave it to you here to give us your number 2.
So this is where it actually got more difficult for me. And this guy is an interesting choice because I think he's actually slightly overrated at present, but he is the best combination of current floor plus long-term ceiling, I think. And that is Anthony Edwards. When you look at his ability to be a leading man in an offensive role right now, even if he's not super efficient at it. If you look at how good he is at the defensive end while playing that role on an elite defensive team, and then if you look at where he can get to long term, which I think everyone agrees, like there's still money sitting out there on the table for him. I think that's the best combination of those things when I compare him to a few other guys who I could have easily put it to.
Danny, you've I think consistently been a little bit lower than me on Edwards. Did you have him at number 2?
I did. And I think that Edwards, there are ways that he could theoretically be supplanted. This is his age 23 season, so he won't be on the list again. So in an ideal world, there would be a young guy who I was confident would be able to like run a high level offense. So, I don't think we've seen one of those since Luka Doncic graduated from these lists. And so a player like that to me would be higher than Edwards. But what I love about Ant, and I mean, do you think about his last 12 months since the last time we did this, he was the best player on a team that made the conference finals. And he did that through offense and defense. And, the Wolves are different now. They're having a little bit of a different start. But Edwards has shown real growth as a scorer. And so I have these concerns about Edwards as an offensive engine because he doesn't have the greatest passing vision. He can be a little bit tunnel. He can be a little selfish as John brought up, but he is the best combination of all of these things. And so I have 2 other players in this tier with him. I do this through tiers, but Edwards to me is ahead of those players in part because what he does is harder to find. And in part because I think he is more likely than the other 2 gentlemen to go beyond that. Like he could push outside of his box, whereas the other 2, that would be very difficult.
So I do have Edwards in his own tier, and the way that we do the tiers to remind everyone, especially those of you who are going to say that your guy should have been way higher. If he's in the same tier as the other guys, that means we're basically splitting hairs. We have to rank him in some way, but we think there are many arguments to have someone in the same tier but lower above him. I don't think there is really an argument to have anyone else above Anthony Edwards because I think he has both the best resume so far. He's the guy who we've seen dominate like sections of playoff series. I mean, what he did to the Phoenix Suns last year, a team that was people picked to beat the Wolves. Let's not forget that.
People including at least 2 of us.
Yeah. Like he has dominated playoff games and playoff series, and then he's also able to ramp up the defense. Well, he's not like an unbelievable playoff or playmaker. He does have, he's good enough there. I think as a two, you'd like to have one more, a decent point guard next to him. Like he's not, the heliocentric guy, at least not yet. And your one criticism of him maybe is just that he doesn't have like the absolute greatest feel, the absolute greatest motor. But yeah.
Briefly, you talked about the not for now with the heliocentric thing. I think that's a not ever. Like the places that Edwards, and this is I think why I'm a little lower than you guys, is the ways that he is deficient are ways that we very rarely see players truly improve. And this is a high bar. No one meets this bar in this class, like of all the prospects we're going to talk about. But that, I don't think he's ever going to be the guy who runs a great offense. And he's a great scorer. He doesn't have to do that. But I'm ready and you guys can disagree. Like I think I'm a little firmer on this point. I don't think he's going to be that guy.
I think
John, did you have Edwards in his own group?
I mulled it over. I think I basically ended up with him in his own group. Yeah. I didn't really focus on the tiers. I was just trying to get my 1 through 10, but I there was a lot more debate like doing like 3, 4, 5, 6 than there was for me on 2. So it's pretty much his own tier. Yeah. And I think the way he gets to be a better playmaker is that teams become so terrified of his scoring that it just opens up Captain Obvious passes. And so that's the thing you're banking on. Like if he becomes a good enough shooter that he just dribbles up and shoots a jump shot over you and you have to double team him 30 feet from the basket, then yeah, he's going to look like a great passer because it's just, the easiest look in the world for him to get off the ball.
Yeah, both he and Victor, there's this, and Edwards is shooting it incredibly well so far this year, but both he and Victor are taking these threes at like kind of unprecedented rates for the type of players that they are, and I really want to see what that ends up producing. And like with Victor, ironically enough, like Edwards not getting to the basket as much, although again on a team that has subpar spacing, it can be part of that too. So Danny, since you think that there are others that are challenging Edwards for this spot, why don't you give us our next pick here?
Sure. And so it's two players that I think of as very similar in certain respects, and that's why I couldn't separate them from each other, and then eventually I couldn't do it. And that's Evan Mobley and Chet Holmgren. And so what both of them are is, to me, foundational defensive players who have real offensive talent. And so with Mobley, it's that he's not a straight 5. He can be a 4, he can be a 5, but he is one of the best defensive players in the league. I think he continues to improve. And then with Chet Holmgren, he's mostly a 5, though he's going to play some power forward this year with the addition of Hartenstein. They haven't been on the floor together, but it's not just that they're, but defensive player of the year potential caliber guys, especially in a world where Victor Wembanyama didn't exist. It's that with Mobley, it's the growth inside the arc, and with Holmgren, it's more of the pick and pop, but also he has some passing elements. And so why I really like those guys is that if you can pair them with basically any other great player and it's going to work. And you're going to have a great team, in all honesty. If you put Evan Mobley with a high-end offensive creator, you're going to have a strong defense and you're going to have a strong offensive foundation. It doesn't matter what type of great offensive player that is. And this is the same thing with Chet. And a part of why I love them and why the plug-and-play element, as I brought up in the intro, is that you can make a lot of these things work. And I don't think it's a coincidence that both of them have succeeded on teams that are a little bit younger and all these other things, because they help make those things work.
Yeah, they certainly are winning players. The offensive upside to me is just a little bit lower with those guys. I have them in this group. I think there are reasonable arguments. I don't think there's an argument to have them above Anthony Edwards. As of right now, as I said, I have these guys in a huge group. I have 6 guys in this next group. But since Danny brought them up, John, Mobley, Holmgren, and you think they're in this conversation for the next players we're going to be talking about here?
I had 5 guys in my next tier. Mobley was one of them for the reasons Danny mentioned, although I did not have him at the top of this tier because I do feel like there are ceiling issues with him at the offensive end of how much you're really going to get from him. Chet Holmgren I had lower just because of health concerns.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I thought about that too.
Yeah. To me, it was easy to put Mobley well ahead of Chet just because I know Mobley's going to be in the lineup. And Chet, maybe it turns out these are freak injuries and the rest of his career is fine. But the visual of his body combined with an unusual broken bone injury at a young age, plus actually two of them, if you look how the other injury happened just in a scrimmage game in Seattle at Jamal Crawford's thing. So I think you have to have legitimate concern about that and dock him because of that. Now, I think Chet I think he has a year on these other guys, right? And he has some things going for him offensively in terms of he can actually put the ball on the floor a little bit. And maybe if he was on a team that didn't have such good perimeter players, he'd be asked to do that more and we'd see more flashes and get more excited that way. So I could see the argument there, but the injury concern was enough for me to push him down the board.
Yeah, on Chet, I agree with you there. Now, Mobley actually has had a knee surgery where I imagined he had, and it was one of those 6 to 8 weekers. So
that's probably he had a little bit of basketball.
So that could be one that maybe he had some of his meniscus taken out. He can be one of these knee swelling guys later in his career, but he's been pretty bulletproof in terms of his ability to play minutes right now. That's another thing about both Mobley and Chet, and I think Victor too. Like these kind of thinner bigs are able to just play more minutes in some respects than your kind of thicker guys. But yeah, I had Holmgren. I have him at the bottom of this group, but I still, to me, he belongs more with the rest of the guys we're going to talk about here than the guys I have in my my next tier, because I just would clearly take Chet over those guys. And I think when he's healthy, there's an argument that Chet is right up there with the rest of these dudes. So Mobley's offense, I think, is the most intriguing thing. Like, I think he's just perennially has established himself as a top 5 defensive player. He can play the 4 defensively. He can play the 5. He can guard basically anyone on the perimeter. He's one of the best rim protectors in the league. Maybe his one flaw is that he's not strong enough to guard the absolute strongest guys in post defense. But most teams, you're going to have either another big behind him, or you'll have like kind of a burly 4 next to him who can do that, and then he can defend off the ball. But the thing that's most exciting to me about Mobley, we always thought it would be the shooting. Like, the guy is just like dribbling to the basket, knocking guys out of the way and dunking on people. Like, he is like I talked about those dunk statistics earlier. Evan Mobley is number 2 in the NBA in dunks right now with 69. And like, he's getting a lot of those like self-created off the dribble. Like, it's not necessarily even that he's getting set up right at the basket for those, although some of them that's the case. So, and I think like, his passing is decent. He certainly has enough to be that perimeter hub and the delay game and the handoff game. And then he also has added this ability now, if you're going to press up on him, to go by you, or if he's against a smaller player, just knock that guy out of the way in the post and go dunk. So that aspect is pretty exciting to me. So I think he's right there in this group. I want to still talk through it. I don't have him number 1 due to the position though, or number 1 in this group, I should say. The guy I finally settled on for my number 3, again, noting that we are splitting hairs between my 3 through 8, is Jalen Williams. John, what do you think of Jalen Williams as the number 3 prospect in the NBA right now?
He was my highest ranked Oklahoma City center.
He's a close second on mine.
I had Jalen Williams at number 4. I think his positional versatility, I think his off the ball game, I think his ability to play on or off the ball work is basically the main guy or the secondary guy. Got exposed a little bit in the Dallas series as far as being a shot creator. I think he's done some things to add a little more variety to his game this year, and we'll see how that translates to the playoffs, but it's translated pretty darn well to the regular season. He's become a phenomenal defensive player, too. I think he has an all-defense case this year. So, but between all that, yeah, I'm going Jalen Williams. I had Mobley 5. I had Jalen Williams at number 4.
I think that Williams he's a fantastic player, and I think that his defensive growth is a huge value add relative to a lot of the other players who does what he does offensively. And as a secondary, I think that he brings a lot to the table. He's a capable 3-point shooter. He can be a secondary ball handler. But I think the reason that I have him slightly lower, I have him fifth, it's not like we're miles apart here, is that I don't see as much primary upside, maybe as you guys do. Is that so there's this ecosystem question. And remember, I lowered Shea when we did top players, and I'm revising that. He will probably be higher when we do it in the future year. And so to me, if a player is a great secondary and probably not a great primary, who would probably look a little bit worse on teams that didn't have the talent that Oklahoma City has, well, because we're throwing them in different boxes. Like, I love Jalen. I think that he's a fantastic player, but he's getting a lot of benefits that if you shuffled the deck again, he probably wouldn't.
So I completely agree with that. I think we're more talking about the value of him as like, I mean, I think this guy could be an all-time great number 2. Like, is this guy like a modern day version of Scottie Pippen? Like, he's not as good maybe as an on-ball guy. Like, the rim protection stuff is really interesting. All these guys in OKC provide that, but Jalen Williams is allowing 52% opponent shooting at the rim, and he contests 20%. That's like a high power forward type of number. He's shown this ability to basically guard 1 through 5. Like, he was their main guy guarding Kyrie Irving for an entire playoff series last year. And yeah, they gave him a lot of help in terms of double teaming when Kyrie came off the screen, but he still was the main guy there. Like, he's not like quite a lockdown one-on-one guy. He kind of more contains, like, he's not like a big pressure guy, but he can guard all these positions. He shoots it very well off the ball. Like, that's a developing thing for him. I don't know if he's going to be like a Paul George level, like come off a screens guy, but he's also someone who can shoot the 3 if you go under on the pick and roll. And so, yeah, like Scottie Pippen would have some offensive playoff series where he would struggle a little bit, like just like in the Dallas series for Jalen Williams last year. So I agree that he doesn't necessarily have that upside, but he's just a guy who has basically no weaknesses as a player. Like, he's gotten a little better as a distributor as well. So like that. So I'm thinking of this guy as, yeah, he's a number 2, but what else could you ask for in a number 2? He can play with anybody in any lineup at the league's most valuable position. So, he's right up there, a guy who could become, sort of like what Jason Tatum has been. Maybe that's, but he'll be in the secondary role that Tatum probably should be in, frankly, offensively.
Yeah, the Paul George thing to me really rings true in that, as you say, he can play almost any role on any different team that you asked him to, including point guard and center, right? Like, who are the other guys who can say that? I mean, I don't know, like Scotty Barnes, maybe, I guess, but or 1 or 2 other guys. Yeah. But it's a really short.
But Jalen Williams guards on the perimeter better than Scotty Barnes. Scotty Barnes might be a little better as a help defender, but not a ton, right?
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah.
So I'll note, I actually moved because of the injury stuff. I think I hadn't factored that in. I moved Holmgren into this tier, and he's now number 5. So he's now my second-rated OKC center too. Because that is a very real concern. And I mean, this is, I wasn't thinking about the first injury and kind of this kind of stuff, but it is fair to classify that too. So that's a real risk. And with Williams, I mean, he's a fabulous player. He could fit almost anywhere. And the other kind of part of this argument in terms of having him and potentially even having him higher than this, like, I mean, I think you could have an argument to have him. I mean, I'm not as high on Edwards as you guys because it works everywhere. And so, yeah, you probably need somebody who's better than him on offense and on defense, but he plays the 3. You can do that. You could do that. It's not a problem to find those guys. It's not like he's a point guard who can't shoot or anything or something.
And he won't take anything off the table for your main guy.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
The way some of these other guys potentially
and so that's what's interesting to me. So like I have a tier that's a hard stop at 6. I thought that there was a clear separation between the top 6 guys and everyone else. So I'm very interested in kind of who else you have in this beyond. I have one player we haven't mentioned, and then everyone else.
Yeah, well, I'll leave it to I have 3 other guys in this group that we haven't mentioned yet, but John, it's probably your turn to give us your next highest guy we haven't discussed yet.
Yeah, my number 3 player, most underrated guy in the whole league, possibly, Franz Wagner. Basically a 6'10" point guard. He has blown up this year. The Banchero injury actually, I think, helped him because it's just given him this ton of on-ball reps, and he's shown more as a three-point shooter, which was the big thing that held him back last year when he really struggled from the perimeter. He's getting to those threes off the dribble. I mean, he's taking hard threes and making them long strides to the rim, like nobody can stay in front of him. Okay playmaker, could be better in that perspective, I think. Another guy who can play a ton of positions, takes nothing off the table for anyone else. I think he's a fantastic player, and the other part of it, I think he's still getting better. And I think there are clear ways that he can still become even more of a force. And it's going to be interesting to see, kind of when Banchero comes back, how they figure that whole thing out. But to me, like, Franz is the point guard, like straight up. Like, even at 6'10", when they try to put small guys on and pressure him up the court, he's completely unflustered and just goes on with what he's doing. Yeah, I think he's absolutely a point guard at this point with his handle. I think that's a huge development that has gone kind of under the radar.
John, what is Franz Wagner's ideal offensive role on a great team? Like let's say on a great offense. Let's put it that way. Like where does he fit in the pecking order on a team with better offensive talent than the Magic have?
Oh, I think right now he's a number 2, but I think he has a chance to be a guy who could be a number 1, even on a great team.
I did have Wagner in this group. You just have to have that level of respect for what he's done this year. If you look at some of the advanced stats in EPM, he's actually number 1 in this group this year, ahead of Jalen Williams at number 2 and Wembanyama, Mobley. And he certainly has been a really important floor raiser for the Magic, with Banchero having only played, I think, 5 or 6 games. Now, of course, he's out with the torn oblique, but he's been relatively healthy in his career up until this point. So, yeah, the Magic, on a team that has nobody else, they are 10.5 per 100 better when he's on the floor this year. But that's because they're kind of average when he's on the floor, and then just worst in the league when he's off. So the point guard stuff is pretty interesting to me, and playmaking usage is in line with that. A lower end point guard, that's basically what percentage of the time are you setting up your teammates for a shot or for free throw attempts. That's 15.1% of the time. So that's right in line with like a lower end point guard, and his dribbling is really good. I do wonder if a few things he's kind of over his head. Like the shooting, it's still only 32.1%. He is taking more off the dribble. I still just don't love it. I think he's going to top out in like that kind of 35% range. So I don't love him as much off the ball. He doesn't really, like, he'll hold up okay on defense, but he doesn't give you really much in the way of rim protection, even at 6'10". So in a different role on a different team, being the power forward, you might be a little disappointed with what you're getting. Like the Magic just have so much size and defense around him that I think that has helped him maybe look a little bit better than he might be on another team. But the big thing that's exciting is just he's been able to up both his playmaking and his scoring as well, and doesn't turn it over a ton. So that's the big thing to me, is just that he's been able to up the load so much. I'm still not sure that he's more than a floor raiser on the offensive end for a bad offense. Like, can he be a number 1 or number 2 offense or option on a great offense, was kind of where it seemed like Danny was going. But yeah, I have him right in this group. But of all the guys who have played well this year, I have the most concerns about the sustainability of his performance, I would say, given that he took a step forward in the shooting, and then that started to wane even right before he got hurt.
Well, and John, I think something that's really interesting with Franz Wagner, and Nate brought up the EPM, and is Franz Wagner is getting a lot of credit for Orlando's defensive success, and I think he has been a part of it. But to me, the way that this gets structured is, are you the reason for the success? Or are you contributing to it? And so to me, he's contributing to it, but not the reason for it. And so is he a good defender? Sure. But the other problem is, if he has to do more of the lifting, if you have if you don't have amazing size and phenomenal perimeter defenders, which the Orlando Magic have, well, then you might need some supplemental rim protection for the floor. He's not really doing that. If you need some of the other stuff. So like, I think that Wagner, I want to trumpet and celebrate the growth that he has done. And it's no denying that he's been a great player. And and the Magic have needed every single ounce of that development. That's great. But where does this go on a differently structured team or on a team that is better? And you could be right. You could be that he has the ball in his hands. But to me, it's like, if you're not in the top 15 players with the ball in your hands, well, then I'm going to focus a little bit more on what you do off the ball. And with Wagner, he could be a great second side guy, but he's not a good enough shooter where you're going to be freaking out. And so it's interesting. Like, he may be one of these players, and there are many over the years who do this, who kind of bridge those gaps. But I'm always going to be worried with him, and I've been lower on Franz going back to when he was at college, on this idea of you have to hit all the marks. And he's hitting them now. I hope he does.
Yeah, I mean, and it shouldn't be lost. Like, I had the guy on my All-NBA team when we did it a couple of weeks ago, right? So, like, it shouldn't be lost what he's doing. He's a really good player. The Magic have been really good this year. Like, that's if he just continues to keep up this level of impact over the course of an entire season, and is able to have like a good playoff run, then he probably does deserve to be like right at the top of this next group. Anything else on Franz, John, or should we discuss maybe the other two guys that we haven't yet that might be in contention for this area?
Yeah, we can get to the other two guys.
All right, who else you got here?
Are you asking me?
Indeed.
Or as they say where I grew up, you talking to me?
Did you like hang out with like a bunch of Italian dudes growing up in Jersey? Is like something I really wish I could have been present for.
It was a time. There was a thing called the mall, Nate, where we all hung out. All right, next guy on my list. We're gonna stay in the same city and the same position, and go Paolo Banchero, who has been injured most of this year, does not have the statistical resume of some of the other players that we've talked about yet, but also has a year on them. And I think in terms of being another huge forward who operates almost as a point guard, I think there's a lot of similarities with Franz. The thing that worries me a little more about Paolo, Nate, we've talked about this, I know, is there's just so many more tough shots with him. And I just want to see more easy.
Yeah, I would say actually that he does on a different team that he has a mechanism to create that because he's just so big, and his ball handling is also outstanding. And I think like he's someone who, I would say in contrast to Franz, if he gets the ball in a certain matchup, like you just have to double team, or at least send like a lot of help. And if he wasn't playing on one of the worst shooting good teams ever, then he might be able to take advantage of that a little bit more. But like Paolo's going to get to the foul line. I think the jumper is really interesting. He flashed it a little bit more, then he got hurt, right? Like both he and Scotty Barnes, who I'm sure we'll talk about next. We just haven't seen anything really from those guys this season. And so you got to kind of go on last year. You can't really put much into this year other than like, all right, maybe he came back shooting a little better, but you can't really tell that in 5 games. But even though they struggled offensively in that playoff series, going up against a good defense, like Paolo did have some really good games, and he was just stuck with them having absolutely nobody. Like he played better than Franz in that playoff series throughout it, and so he to me has a floor on the offensive end and the ability to generate at least some efficient offense and just say like, yeah, we have to deal with this in a way that I think if you look at all these guys that we've talked about behind Edwards, I think he probably has the highest upside of any of those guys as an offensive player. Would you guys agree with that?
I think he might have the highest upside and the lowest floor, like both.
Yeah. What do you think, Danny?
I think that he might have the highest upside. I mean, because Banchero, I love undeniability, and he does reach that oh shit level at times. And I think that he has the size and the ball handling and sometimes the passing ability to do it. And so when you think about that in a different situation with more spacing and potentially a more dynamic offensive foil that he could play off of, that could work really well. And like Franz Wagner, I think both of them are are very good defensive players who can be a part of a great defense rather than the reason for it. And at the 4, that's great. Like that's not you. And I wish that Paolo could play a little bit at the 5, and maybe in time we see that. We're not going to see it in Orlando because they have a billion centers. But I think that Banchero, that what he brings offensively, I think it's harder to stop. And I appreciate what Franz Wagner has done. I have them in different tiers. I have Paolo above Franz. I have both of them clearly in my top 10. Because I think that his game is more transportable than what Franz Wagner has done. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that and because Paolo, he's so much more physically gifted that I think he could push this even further with time. Also, he's younger, which does help out. And so Banchero, age 22 season, has, and I think that with Paolo, we got to see what Franz was able to do because Banchero was out. When he was available in a very small sample at the start of the year, I thought he was kind of touching another level offensively. And so it's not full confirmation because it was not many games, but the idea that he could be that guy.
The big concern statistically about Banchero and vis-a-vis Franz is very interesting, is that the Magic have always seemed, the on-off splits have always favored Franz. Now, you could point to some possible reasons for that. This year, it's because Paolo hasn't been there at all. Last year, it could be because Franz was playing with his brother and also Jonathan Isaac, which was like a wrecking crew on the second unit. So there are definitely reasons for that. I think like Franz just has more kind of connectivity to his game, works a little bit better in the team game. So as of right now, and Banchero, he kind of has like a little Anthony Edwards to his game, just in terms of taking a bunch of bad shots. But I
agree with that.
Paolo is the guy that in terms of the context, I really just most would want to see him on a different team, like same role, but different team that had more spacing, and he wouldn't have to take as many mid-rangers because the paint was packed. And, to have the ideal player for Paolo to play with would be a guy, a Buddy Hield or Isaiah Joe, who could like set him a little ghost screen at the top and then let him get downhill. And like, how are you dealing with that? But the Magic just have never had a player like that. All the stuff that they run is just not and the personnel they have is just not conducive to unleashing him. Like, could we be thinking about him as more even along the lines of like, I wouldn't say close to Luka because he's not that level of passer, but someone that you can really, more kind of a LeBron James, Luka-esque role where just because you have the spacing, he can actually like get to spots, and like he's always going up against a smaller player and you got to deal with that. He can spray out to shooters, or he's just going to overwhelm you physically, and instead he's just like bashing his head against the wall every time on this Magic team, which admittedly is winning, and they have a good formula. I'm not saying they're doing it wrong, but I think like he's in basically the worst possible position for him to succeed right now.
Yeah, I think that's mostly fair.
Okay, let's talk about Scotty Barnes here. Another guy who, John, you've always been the Barnes muse among us, so I'll let you talk about what you've seen from him of late.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised we're talking about him next, actually.
Oh, yeah? Oh, okay. Well, then I won't usurp you. Who are you going with?
So this is the part where I start a big argument. Can you guys hear that vacuum cleaner or leaf blower or whatever it is?
Yes, it's pretty bad.
Just making sure it wasn't coming out of my laptop. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Anyway.
let me make a note of this time. So yeah, are you like muting right now? Let's actually deal with this. So sorry about that. So is that what it is? It's not something you have control over?
No, it is in my backyard. But it should. Oh. I'm hoping they'll be done relatively soon. I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
Oh. Hopefully it's done now.
All right.
Yeah, usually only takes them about 3 minutes to do the entire yard, so it should be gone now. We'll be fine.
I'll try to be aggressive muting moving forward.
Okay, yeah. Maybe you can even just like turn your volume down a little bit, and then I can boost you later. That's probably better, because then at least we won't get as much of that. Okay, so John, sorry, let's just pick up with you. You can just say who you had above Scotty. So just start right there.
Yeah, so I had a couple of players above Scotty, but the one that I think is going to start the biggest argument, because it was my last player in this tier. I had a tier of 5 players. I had Franz, Jalen Williams, Mobley, Paolo Banchero, and LaMelo Ball.
Ooh.
Oh, baby. I think I actually just tweaked my calf. Go on.
Are you sure you didn't sprain your ankle?
Yeah.
So,
That's
two things that I think have been held against him relatively fairly. One, sort of the whiff of unseriousness that comes off of his game at times, especially
a whiff. I mean, I'm 3,000 miles away, and it's overpowering my nostrils right now.
It might be more than a Soussan at this point.
Okay, all right. Well, we know why. I think we have him lower. I think most people know that. So what's the case for having him higher?
I think in spite of all that, he's pretty good right now, and obviously going forward, you talk about ceiling, right? Like, if you found out that LaMelo Ball made first team All NBA 3 years from now, would you be shocked?
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%.
Shocked? You bet.
Shocked.
John, I have it in my I have it in my notes of, does LaMelo Ball have the most offensive upside of anybody on my list? I have him in my next tier, and that was the question. Is because does he have that potential? Yeah, I mean, it's been a super weird situation. Yeah, I agree with you on that front. All NBA, I think, is a little trickier, but in terms of could he be one of the 10 best offensive players in the league? Maybe.
Yeah, I think you have to separate him a little bit from the team that's been around him and the environment he's been in. There is some proof of concept that like him as the engine for a decent team works. He was far and away the best player on a 43-win team, right?
I don't know if he was far and I don't know if he was far and away the best player on that team. Actually, I think the shooting gods was probably the best player on that team, and then maybe he was like number 2, slightly above the rest of those guys. That was like kind of an ensemble cast, but yeah. So all right. I mean, I guess if you're gonna say that he really has like that much offensive upside, like we know about the threes. I mean, it's just a ridiculous number, 13.7 per 36. Only making 35.7%. Right now, true shooting still not above the league average. He's almost at 40% usage. That would be like a top, probably 3. That might even be the record, actually. Maybe Westbrook. Some of those Westbrook years are higher, but yeah, the playmaking is like, it's kind of okay, but he just doesn't. To me, he just doesn't have a path of being effective enough inside the arc to get to the lofty heights you're talking about.
The playmaking is kind of okay because this second half of the play requires Moussa Diabate to both catch the ball and place it in the basket. Okay? Like, can we talk about some of these other dudes he's playing with when we look at his playmaking or assist rate? I mean, clearly like an elite hit-ahead passer, right? In the half court, you'd probably say he's good. He's probably not quite as elite at that. Relies a lot on floaters. Finishing has been a weakness. He's gotten better at it. He's gotten a little better at drawing fouls. And, obviously we need to talk about it. He still has these bullshit plays where like he'll do a take foul 90 feet from the basket because he doesn't like a call, and then he'll pick up cheap fouls that way. I mean, his foul rate for a guard is ridiculous. So there are definitely still negatives here, but I think there are a lot of different ways that he could fit in on a good team and be like really good. And I guess I just don't see any of that from any of the other players on this list.
Danny?
So yeah, I mean, with LaMelo, I think that there is offensive upside there. His talent as a passer and as a shooter opens up things that just aren't available from some other players. And he does it at a good positional size. And he is a bad, unserious defender, but there are ways that he could be better at that. So I think there is potential.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm not gonna go ahead and put the guy that like got benched for being too unserious recently right in this top group. I mean, and those mentality aspects definitely concern me. Like, you just don't get the idea that like this guy cares that much about winning. You know, if he gets hurt, like, you also have the injury concerns where he's got these ankles now that are not, you don't feel great about, and he always seems to have some sort of a lower body injury. And so I don't love that aspect. I think he's always going to be a defensive liability because he is like absolutely zero physicality. Like, he's not a guy who plays hard. Like, he does have pretty decent anticipation, but like teams just go after him over and over and over again. And yeah, I think like the playmaking is solid, but he's not a threatening enough scorer inside the arc that like he's really able to draw the defense that much. And I don't think that like the Hornets don't have great players around it, but they haven't had like terrible spacing, I would say, necessarily. You know, we'll see what it looks like if they can actually play more than 4 minutes in a row with Mark Williams and like start throwing some alley-oops to him, which he hasn't really had. But like Nick Richards hasn't been like like he's a backup quality center. He's not horrible. So I'm just like, other than bombing these threes, which I'm not like, all right, if he's going to hit 40% of those, yeah, maybe we could buy it. He was hitting that earlier. I don't think that it's possible for anyone other than Steph Curry to shoot 40% on these type of shots right now. So you're telling me that this guy's going to shoot like Steph Curry? I'm going to say no. And to reach the levels you guys are talking about, to me, he's got to shoot that way because the rest of his game is just not on the level that it needs to be. But no, I appreciate certainly the contrarian take. Like, there is something about it where you're like, man, this crazy 3-point volume, like that's something that I normally would be very focused in on. Everything else is just too much of a red flag for me to buy it at this point over someone like Scotty Barnes.
So the way that I'll put this is I have a group from 7 to 12, and he is in that group, but he is at the bottom of that group because I think he is the least likely to maximize his potential. And then the other thing, and I think it's a natural transition to Scotty Barnes, who is firmly within this group, more firmly than LaMelo, is that if there's this idea of like, well, if it works, but that it's the if it doesn't work. And so with Scotty Barnes, it's like, well, if the offensive game, if the higher rolled stuff isn't great for a great team, well, he's still a very good defender, and he can still do other stuff. And so like, and he plays a more valuable, he plays a valuable defensive position. So with Scotty Barnes, the 80th percentile outcome might actually be worse than LaMelo, but the 50th, 40th, 30th are meaningfully better.
Yeah, John, what's your take on Barnes this year? He's only played 465 minutes because he's had a couple of injuries. But, we kind of had him in this 5, 6, 7 range of memory serves last year. I know I did. So you've got him a little bit lower. What's that based on?
I just don't really feel like I've seen a ton of progress since then. The shooting is, it's down to 31% again this year. Like, it seemed like his shooting was taking a leap forward. Now it's like, okay, maybe that's not real.
That was unsustainable at the point we talked about it last year. I think we kind of acknowledged that at least a little because he was shooting like 40% from three for a couple months there, which that was kind of never going to happen.
Even ended the year at 34. Now he's taken more attempts this year, but he's back down to 31. I think he's right now he's more of a floor player maker than a guy who adds to the ceiling of a good team. And I actually had him kind of neck and neck with Cade in that respect. Even though Cade is a better outside shooter, I think the net effect on them is the same, where they're able to raise the floor and hoover up possessions for a shitty team, but in the context of a good team, you're not really sure what you're going to end up doing with them. Capable of defensive playmaking. I'm not sure he's actually a good defensive player. you heard some rumblings that he was kind of a little bit different, let's say, off the court, and was, maybe not not an atrocious locker room guy, but maybe not like the leader, so to speak.
Yeah.
That weighed against a little bit of where I put him. I still like him as a player and a prospect, but I think age 23 season now, you want to see a little more of a runway upward, and I'm just not seeing it yet. So he barely edged out Cade for the number 10 spot on my list.
Yeah, I think he's got to be probably at the bottom of this tier to me. Chet's probably gonna be above him. I do think like there are a few interesting things, like it's shooting 47% on long twos. That might be a way. That's again a very limited sample. We're talking 465 minutes. I kind of have just tossed out this year, except for like this Raptors team has been a mess. He hasn't been able to play with quickly for basically even a second, and they've had a bunch of other injuries. Davion Mitchell has been playing with the like. You're just like there are a lot of things that just haven't been a great ecosystem to take away a lot in Toronto this year. But the one thing that has intrigued is 19% playmaking usage. That is like a top 5 in the league number right now. And now his teammates aren't actually making any of these shots necessarily, but that is kind of intriguing. The question is, can he become enough of a scoring threat? I think like he's below, say, Franz and Paolo in that area, but I think he is a better defensive player than those guys. So he's not a great on-ball defender on the perimeter. Like he can switch on to guys, like it's not a disaster, but he's also not a plus in that. But he does provide some pretty solid rim protection. I mean, that's the one thing that when he's on the floor, the Raptors opponents actually don't shoot a very high percentage. He contests, power forward level of shot, 20% of opponent shots around the rim, which is pretty good. And he added a lot of defensive playmaking last year. That was the biggest thing that had him bumping up for me last year, was that he became a better defensive playmaker and started to actually adhere to the reputation that he had on that end. So yeah, I think I probably will bump him down to this next group with LaMelo and Cade perhaps, but at the top of that group. But I think, I can't in good conscience say that there's an argument that I'd rather have Scotty Barnes than Chet Holmgren or Franz Wagner or Mobley at this point.
I think now might be a good time to talk about the player that I had the hardest time placing that we haven't. I had the hardest time placing, but he's also a player we haven't discussed, and that's Alperen Sengun. And yes. Alperen Sengun, the real difficulty that I had is I've talked about the idea of credit, and we talked about it in terms of Franz Wagner's defense and everything else, is that Alperen Sengun has been an important part of Houston's success on the defensive end. They've been a wonderful defensive team this entire year. I have trouble with how to work this, and how versatile, like team flexible is Alperen Sengun defensively, because I think offensively he can be a good player, and offensively some of the things that have gone poorly for Sengun this year seem like the outlier, like his horrendous rim finishing. Alperen Sengun's 22. He's been better before. I expect that to improve. But all of that stuff doesn't matter as much if he's not a legit defender. I'm not talking top 10. I'm not talking top 5. But if he's not a top 20 defensive center in the league, I don't care how good his offense is. And so the question is he a top 20 defensive center in the league? Because based on team success and what they've done when he's been on the floor, you'd say yes. But
I think he actually is, not by a wide margin, but I think he's a one position defender, right? Like he's just a straight up 5. But I think he's good enough at that level. I think he has anticipation. I think his feet actually are better than we thought when he came into the league. Has some level of shot blocking instinct. Doesn't foul a ton. If he could just he still takes some stupid gambles on defense, which is probably the biggest way that he gets himself in trouble. But if you look at his overall effectiveness, now as a defensive player, and even separate it from the monster that is the rest of the Rockets defense, I think he's good enough at this point where you could play him on a different team in a high level game and ride that out because of his offense.
Yeah, I think he can be like slightly below average as a center. Is it something that maybe could come into play at the highest levels in the playoffs, particularly if he didn't have some of these monsters around him? Yeah, I think it could. Like we saw the Warriors take advantage of him pretty badly in that NBA Cup quarterfinal. But he's not, oh my God, like he's just, people are going around him like a traffic cone. So I think he's better than sort of like that Sabonis level of guy. Like he's not a guy where he's like, he's so bad that you just, or Karl Anthony Towns in his Minnesota days, where he's not so bad that it's like, okay, we have to just have him playing out on the floor defensively and make the guy give up the ball, because if we have someone coming downhill at him, like it's all over. And they do a good job of keeping him out of the action as well. Like that's another thing, they do protect him. I think the defense has been a positive relative to what would have been expected when he was drafted. So I don't really have many questions about his defense. I think he's like, reasonably, maybe a below average playoff center, but a reasonably average-ish center this year. He's not a Valanciunas guy. To me, the bigger problem is the offense. Like I thought this guy could be really a transformational offensive player, and the numbers are awful this year. 53% true shooting. He is shooting 50% on contested shots within 10 feet. Like he just is like, I thought he really was a guy who knew how to use his body around the rim and had good touch. And if he gets the ball in the post against most centers, like look out, you're going to have to double team. And that just hasn't been the case this year. Like the numbers are very good in terms of the on-off for him because they don't have anyone else who can generate shots and pass the way he can as an offensive fulcrum. But that's more just raising the floor. Like I really I hope he gets better at his finishing, but we're going on 2 months of this right now where he's like a center who is below league average true shooting by 4 points is like that is not great.
He is shooting a shit ton of floaters and hasn't been hitting them at a high enough rate to really justify it. And I think that's been part of the issue.
And he took a big step forward on that last year, and now he's fallen backwards. So which one is the outlier? I'm concerned about that.
I have a little more faith that he can get to a higher degree of accuracy than he's shown so far, and that he could actually incorporate the 3-point line at some point too. And then I think he just has so much in his bag if he can get some kind of true perimeter threat to his game. The part that did concern, like that Golden State game in the NBA Cup, he could not do a damn thing against Draymond. Which, I mean, he's not the only player in history who can say that, obviously, but the extent...
but Draymond has a long history that's kind of coming to its end.
Yeah. The extent to which he could not operate was a little jarring. So I'm sure he breathed a sigh of relief on that second to last play when he saw Kevon Looney on him in that game. But anyway, I digress.
Briefly on the floater, just so we have the stats out there. Şengün, actually, I'll do that and restrict areas. So this is using Basketball References splits. So Şengün, 22-23 full season, 67%, 68% floater or around the basket, 69% the year after that, 59% this year. And then from 3 to 10 feet, we call that roughly floater range, 50%, 50%, 44%. So if I'm going to pick which one of the, where the truth is, it's a lot closer to the first two numbers than the third. That's just the way I am.
Yeah. I mean, it has been very, they're just, as you watch him this year, it's like, oh, well, that's a bucket. And then he just misses. Like he is contested, right? Like it takes some skill to make that, but I feel like those are plays that he's made in the past. So I had Şengün 12th in this 8 to 12 tier that included Barnes, LaMelo, and then two other guys, one of whom we have never really discussed at these lofty levels before, but Cade Cunningham would be my number 10 at this point. And John, what have you seen from him of late? And did you have him around here, lower? Obviously not higher because we talked about everyone higher.
I had Cade Cunningham 11th. The last thing
Okay.
I did was kind of split hairs between him and Scotty Barnes at 10 and 11. Definitely been a lot better this year, right? It's amazing what kind of having a real team and a real coach around him and everything can do. He also, I've always believed in him as a shooter, and he's finally showing that this year, 38.6% from three, which he'd been disappointing from that range basically his whole career up until this season. And I think that helps. As a leading man, he still turns it over too much. His dribble gets loose, especially in his left hand. Some of his passing choices are interesting, let's say. So there's a high degree of playmaking usage, and he sort of has to on the team he's on. But I think on a real team, like, he's a number 2 without any doubt to me. And the Pistons have just kept using him like he's Luka, which he's not. And I think that's been a little bit unhelpful. He's not like a crazy athlete, finishing, like, he's okay. So I think kind of he is what he is at this level. I don't know. I don't see crazy upside from here. I think there's a pretty decent floor because he can handle the ball and shoot. But I just don't know how much else gets added to that. He's a number 2.
Yeah, and his defense has gotten better under JB Bickerstaff. It had really slipped before that. The other thing about Cade is, like, he's finally actually starting to hit some of his long twos. He's not in like the high 30s on that. He's up to 44%. Still not a great finisher at 48% on shots inside 10 feet that are contested. So you'd love for his 2-point shooting to be better. That's at 48% overall as well. But he's hitting his spot up threes. And yeah, I mean, I would like to see him more attacking from the wings as a secondary guy, in the post on mismatches. His isolation game, like, he just hasn't really been able to get to that at all. But their offensive limitations have just been, all right, Cade, we're going to line up the pins and you knock him down and pick and roll from the top every time. And he's gotten slightly better at that, but he still turns it over a ton. And, like, it's part of the reason he's better is because they actually have real NBA shooting around him, but also, like, he just is not equipped to go up against the opposing team's best defender every night. But I think he could fit in, maybe even as a number 2, which he just has not been in that role. Maybe he probably has as good an argument as, say, like, the problem with Cade is he doesn't have the athleticism of Jalen Williams, but he could, if he were in that Jalen Williams role, I think it could look a lot different for him. Yeah, like, he just has too much on his plate right now, but we just don't know for sure what it would look like in a role more appropriate to his skill set.
And so, again, this is tiers. I have these players all really close. I said I have the tier from 7 to 12. I have him 7th in that tier from 7 to 12, in part because I am the most confident that Cade Cunningham could succeed in a smaller offensive role than these other guys, because I think he can shoot and he's a capable ball handler. And Nate, as you said, if Cade Cunningham was in the situation where the other team's best perimeter defender was not guarding him, I think we could see him eat a lot better. And there is no reason, like, you're right that we haven't seen it, but I think it's fair to draw that analogy. And I like that you brought up Jalen Williams, because that is something that Jalen Williams has thrived with. And, not everybody has the luxury of getting to play with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or to play with a player who's better than them. But if I was to roll the dice and say, okay, Franz Wagner, Scotty Barnes get to be, and Cade get to be the second best offensive player on their team. You don't know what kind of best player it is. I think Cade would thrive the most. I think that he would do the most. Is he the worst defender of those 3? Probably. But I think that the margin between them on defense is actually tighter than the margin that they have on offense. And so it's a close call. They're all within the same tier. I'm not trying to make some sort of big, grandiose statement with this. But I think that based on what we know, and like John was saying, there's enough evidence that Cade Cunningham can shoot that I was concerned after unambiguously about what happened his first couple of years in the league, but that started to look more like himself last year, and then it's really starting to work better. Now, again, I'm not going to try to go overboard with 23 games, an 800-minute sample. But when that 800-minute sample looks more like what I thought and more like what we saw last year, I'm starting to get more comfortable with it. And so he's not perfect, but the other part of it is like none of these guys are. And so you're kind of scaling all of them for a role that is different than they have.
Yeah, to me, the one thing with Cade, it's like, hey, he's shooting the ball great this year. His true shooting's up to 54 now. Like, even with that, like, he still hasn't been a very efficient player.
Well, and a big part of that is he's not getting to the line as much as you'd like. Like Cade Cunningham, he's never gotten over 5 free throw attempts per 36 minutes. He's closer to 4 this year than 5. And that could be a way, because he's typically a pretty capable free throw shooter and 3-point shooter to get there. And yeah, of course, if he could get over 50% from 2, that would be the way that this bread could be buttered. But I think he can. And it's the ecosystem. The Pistons, like we talked about how they have better shooting. They still don't have better shooting. They have better shooting than Magic because everyone does, but he could still get a more favorable situation. And also something you think about this idea. I remember going back to Brandon Roy with this of like, somebody has to take the hard shots. And if Cade Cunningham is no longer the player who has to take those hard shots every single time for his team, a lot of these efficiency numbers are going to look better and he's probably not the guy who should. And guess what? None of these guys probably are.
John, I want to ask you about a guy who maybe doesn't have the same level of profile. We haven't been talking about him. He's 23 already in these discussions, but I also feel like he's closer to the guys we've been talking about than the next group, and that's Jalen Johnson, who you see probably more than just about anybody in the league. Where did he fall for you in your preparation? Because you said you only really went to 11 guys. Like, is he at all a contender? Because he was for me.
He was one of the guys on my honor. I actually had 12 guys that I thought really hard about. About really genuinely yes, I originally had them in my 10 at some point. And then the next 2 guys after that were Jalen Johnson and Derek Lively. And so for Jalen Johnson, to me, he's improved year over year quite a bit. Still a guy you don't really worry about at the 3-point line. Team just let him have it from out there. Gotten pretty good handling the ball, creating in his floater game. Can still be a little mistake prone in those ranges, though. They've been able to cobble together some halfway decent offense in the non-Trey minutes by having Jalen Johnson as sort of a point guard, but with massive support, right? Yes, he's out there as a point guard, but he's out there with Bogdanovich and Hunter and Okongwu. They're not sending him out there with 4 scrubs, They're making sure that unit can float and that there are secondary handlers all over the place. 12% playmaking usage from a 4. Yeah, that's impressive. He's going to get some highlight dunks. Defensively, he's kind of comes and goes. He's okay, but you wouldn't call him a phenomenal player. Good passer though for a guy at his position.
Yeah, and I think he does contest a pretty good number of shots around the rim, 20.4%. And yeah, the number he's allowing 60% shooting. It would be a little bit below average for a center, but that's solid for a power forward. And the overall Hawks rim defense has been pretty good this year when he's been on the floor. So I like that. Adding that element to me is important, and he can switch on to basically anyone on the perimeter. He's not unbelievable. You're just never going to get around him. But all right, if you run a 1-4 pick and roll, you're fine with him switching if he has to. And so I like that. Yeah, it's really the shooting that's kind of the big question to me, and his overall efficiency is just right at league average right now, basically because he can't hit a 3. And above the break, you still have questions about it too. So you start to run into some issues with team building if you're also going to play him next to a center. What do you think his chances are of getting better as a shooter, John?
I don't think his form is broken, but at this point, I have a hard time seeing him become appreciably better than a 1-3 proposition, right? And
it's just not what he wants to do. Like,
And
you
he's
can
not-
tell what guys
he's-
want to do, and that's not what he wants to do.
He's not taking any of these off the dribble either. I mean, the ones he takes are spoon-fed from Trey. So you factor that in too. So I don't think he's ever going to be like but he's only 4.4 per 36 right now. I have a hard time seeing like a huge volume come from him. So I think he's more a downhill guy where it's there's some floater game there, but a lot of it is just get to the basket.
Danny?
John, I smiled when you said that you had like the two players that you had right outside of this were Jalen Johnson and Derek Lively. Those were the exact same two for me, like the hardest cuts off of my tiers. And Lively, was there. But I still have one player, I don't know if Nate does, who we haven't discussed, who's not even in my tiers. He's in my top 10. And
okay.
I think it's the guy I had in my top 10 originally, and then I had to move out.
I'm not sure it is.
Okay.
And that's Jabari Smith Jr. And the idea behind this is, I know a lot of the all-in-ones aren't loving it and all that stuff this year. I'm cool with that. I don't care. Jabari Smith Jr. has the distinct possibility, and it's been borne out a little bit by what we have, to be a player who can function defensively at the 4 and the 5, who can also space the 4. He's not elite. I wish he was a little bit better at that. I wish he was a little better with the ball in his hands. But when you think about what Jabari Smith Jr. could be on various different teams, I think it's easier to fit him in than some of these other guys because, Houston's probably, not going to do everything that happened over those last 19 or whatever games it was, but he can be a very good player with an unusual skill set that's useful. And I really value that.
He was the third highest rated Houston Rockets power forward on my list.
Well, I'll try to support Danny here because I do think he's one of the most underrated players in basketball right now. I can't, like, if he were truly a center as opposed to a guy who can like maybe play a little bit of center at the end of games or on backup units and like really protected the rim at that level and could switch. If I believed that this guy was like the second coming of Al Horford, then I would have him at this level. I think he's certainly someone who is, he'll never make an all-star team. Like, and I don't know if he would deserve to, for me, who I thought I was higher on him than anybody else, and Danny proved me wrong on that. But like, I do think he's so underrated because he just enables so much of what they can do. And like, there's a reason the guy plays 40 minutes a game when they aren't just wasting minutes on Jock Landale for no reason. And in these games that mattered, they played him at backup center, and like that's really, really useful. But yeah, his inability to really do anything off the dribble, and like maybe you can post him up against a smaller guy 2 times a game, but he'll always shoot a fadeaway mid-ranger. Like he could be going up against like the John Leon chair and shoot a fadeaway mid-ranger. Like he's just cannot overpower anyone or generate a good shot no matter who he's going up against. Like he'll make that fadeaway sometimes, like, but it's not something you're like scared of as the defense. So I mean, I love that he can switch 1 through 5 and protect the rim and shoot the ball on the other end. Like that is an amazing skill set, but I can't put him in the same breath as like guys who could truly be like, possibly on ball stars or even like the second best player, but he's a good 4th best player. He's probably one of the best 4th best players you're going to find.
Yeah. I mean, his shot form looks amazing, but like he's at 35% on okay volume.
Yeah. I mean, I think he'll get there. That's my thought is he's going to get there to be like a threat.
If I had to pick which one of a lot of these kind of forwardy guys was going to actually shoot reasonably well at a good volume, I'd pick him over Franz. I'd pick him over Scotty Barnes. I'd pick him over all these guys. Now he doesn't have the same on-ball juice that they do, but and this is a philosophical difference. It's just, if you're not going to be the best on-ball player in your starting 5, I care less about that than other people do, because somebody else doing that, somebody else is going to do that lift. Great. More power to them.
John, was there anyone else in your, you mentioned 12 guys, and I think we had only talked about 11 at that point. Is there anyone else you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, Amen Thompson.
Yeah, he was just outside this group for me, but
Same.
I could see why you might have him there because you've been higher on his on-ball upside. Is that your thinking, or you just think that what he is so valuable?
Yeah, I don't, is whirlwind a position? Like to me, that's where like he's a non-shooter at this point. Obviously, you're hoping that part comes around some more, but he's like a point center almost. He could just play the whole spectrum with his ability to handle the ball, his ability to defend across positions and defend at an extremely high level across those positions. And as a playmaker at the rim, I think he puts a lot of pressure on defenses. A little bit more of a concern about what guys you're putting around him.
That's my biggest thing. I think he just forces a lot of compromises for you offensively at this point in time.
Yeah, but like if you Şengün and Thompson are the same age, if you held the gun to the Rockets' front office head and asked him to pick one, I'm not 100% sure they would pick Şengün.
That might be true. Like Amen Thompson might have a higher floor than Şengün. I still think if Şengün gets back to some of the offensive flashes that he's shown, that it ends up being a little bit more valuable. Like I just am still, I don't know. Like, how do you get Amen Thompson out of this dunker spot, fast break, on ball role to actually be someone who's more threatening than that isn't limiting your lineups around him? That's the question. How does that happen?
I mean, shooting improvement has to take place somewhere. You think, right?
I just don't. I think
layups.
Yeah, I think it's just very unlikely that happens though. Like it could happen, but I just don't want to put my money there.
Well, and on that front, men's shooting has been his weak point since at least when I can remember was like 16, 17. That's been considered his biggest flaw. And he's been a great prospect this whole time. Seems like a very good kid. Seems like a great work ethic. I think he spent some time on this. That's always been my thing. Is like, if somebody understands what their weakness is, so we'll have to see. I love him. I think that he's a great talent. I think that he can be an impactful player, even offensively, without the shot. Rim pressure matters. But the difference between him and some of the other guys who do that is that you can lag off of him in a different way. And you're not going to put the ball in his hands the way you do with Zion, the way that you do with Giannis, those kind of guys.
Well, that would be the way. If he could get to that level, that would be the way without a jump shot. And would I love to see the Rockets or what another team, if he happened to get traded, we're thinking about this in the abstract, do that? Yes. I think that Amen is such a good player in all these other facets that you try it. But that is such an unusual pathway, and it's an even less common pathway for a guy who's not like 6'8". And so I love him, and I think that he is best. I mean, he's like 6'7", right? Like he's got pretty damn good size.
Yeah.
In my head, he's 6'6", but I could be wrong.
Well, I mean, I think he was like 6'7", and also like he's like catching alley-oops in the dunker spot. Like if he's not 6'8", he certainly plays like 6'8".
I mean, if I'm the two guys I invoked were Zion and Giannis. Like Giannis is a whole hell of a lot bigger than that, and then Zion's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Well, to me, it would be like Russell Westbrook would be the analog.
I like that.
Ooh.
But for example, John, like the other guys that these defense first young guards like Dyson Daniels and Jalen Suggs, love both those dudes. Do you agree with me that Amen has the best potential to break outside of the kind of role that all three of those guys have?
Yes, and that is why I had Amen 12 and Suggs and Daniels tied for 15 on my list.
Yeah, I think Amen would be probably at the top of this next group, but the only way, just to acknowledge the like 10% chance that he could become a Russell Westbrook sort of player, because he does have really good passing if you do put the ball in his hands. And could he at least, like, if you just totally go under on him, make a 17-footer? Like, he's never going to make an off-the-dribble three. Now, it's also worth noting that, like, Russell Westbrook, when he was younger, was not this, like, atrocious shooter. Like, I'm thinking more of kind of what Russell Westbrook was once he forgot how to shoot. That's more what I'm thinking of. Like, hey, he's not going to get to the point of, like, a 2016, 2017 Russell Westbrook who actually could make a three, and, that 17-footer was actually a shot you really had to respect for him. Maybe that's like, if a man could just make a 17-footer like reasonably often, he's starting to hit a few of those. make a corner three if you do put him off the ball. Like that's kind of the most hope that I have for him. By the way, Amen is 6'7", 6'5", and 3/4 in socks. So that's 6'7".
Legit 6'7".
All right, who else can we talk about? I mean, are there any? Let me ask you this, guys. Who is your highest rated guy from the 24 draft?
I did not have anyone on the 24 draft on my list. I did not even think about anyone from the 24 draft.
Yeah.
Same.
I mean, I did just because I felt like we had to, but
well, it would be Jared McCain. I mean, unfortunately, he's dealing with this meniscus issue, but I mean, he's shown that he could have some on-ball juice, and he has defensive limitations, but I think he could play on-ball and play off-ball. I think that's very exciting. And then, indexing on what I evaluated in the draft stuff, Reed Shepherd and Alex Sarr, but both of those guys have had a little bit less encouraging early starts, though I don't lean as heavily on first summer league and first 25 games in the NBA, especially if the dudes aren't playing a lot in the case of Shepherd.
Yeah, I mean, he's the second best Shepherd in the NBA right now.
He's the healthiest Shepherd in the NBA right now. He's got that going.
Reach. I mean, I think Danny and I will do a follow up on some of these guys that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet. But like I'm not totally giving up on my pre-draft evaluation of like Alex Sarr and Reed Shepherd. Like my next group, I call it players to watch, which I say is like guys that I think have close to all-star potential or could be a very solid starter in a certain role that's pretty rare to get. So Sarr, Reed Shepherd, like I'm not totally giving up on those guys. Like I think McCain falls into that category too. I don't think he's going to be an all-star. I think there's a possibility. This would probably be controversial. I would still have Scoot Henderson in that group. Like I still am not totally ruling out him as a guy who could be an all-star yet, because I think everything other than the shooting has at least shown some improvement. But obviously the shooting is atrocious. So I don't know that we need to get into him too much unless John wants to like tell me why I'm an idiot now.
I don't think he's gotten even 1% better.
Yeah. See, I think I disagree with that.
Compared to the second half of last year, I just think he came back as the exact same player. I mean, obviously, his first 2 months of last season, that was train wreck theater. Yeah. But then compared to the guy I was watching in March and April of last year, I just don't think he came back this year any different. It's kind of disappointing. The guy we haven't really talked about is Brandon Miller.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought it up.
At the end of the day, I thought he was just kind of in this tier where I just couldn't get excited about anything getting to a high enough level where I was willing to put him in the top 15. But he certainly had a case to be there.
Yeah, another one of these guys just in this Charlotte funhouse mirror of a team that it's tough to evaluate. I mean, the guy is taking 11.5 3-point attempts per 36, but he also is already 22. Which is, I mean, that was the thing that people kind of forgot about him when he was drafted, was he was a year older than all these guys. And he's shooting at 35%. He's been relatively healthy now. Like defensively, I'm like, maybe he gets to not being a liability, but he hasn't shown enough to me to be, someone that I'm like really excited about. He has some intriguing numbers as far as like contesting at the rim. 16% contest rate is actually, for this player type is pretty damn good. So like the on-ball stuff hasn't come along that well. When LaMelo's been out, he's been overstretched, but like his ability to like be a guy you can run plays for off the ball, or you run a pick and roll and you at least have to like make sure that as long as you don't have a guy on him that can just like get into his body and take him out of that you have to get somebody up on that. The idea that he could make enough shots that you'd be concerned about that, like his usage way too high, 28%, like that's not something that's sustainable for him. So like I could see him getting to be kind of a lower end. Also, he's like kind of right on track for what I thought he would be as a prospect.
One frustration that I've had with Miller so far is like he's been 55% true shooting both years roughly. And you talked about the usage, but he's still not getting to the line. Like, about 3 per 36 there. And so that could be a way for Miller to really up his effectiveness. And he could be, I think, a capable defender. He has some nice block highlights, actually. But the possession-by-possession stuff, it's not nearly as good as some of the other forwards that we really like on this list. So he has the talent to do it. But if we're talking about players who have the potential to get on the list. I have a couple more that I think that we don't have to discuss them, but I want to make sure at least we get out there. And if anybody feels that spark, we can. Shaedon Sharpe. I mean, the athleticism is there. I still wait for the jumper to be there. Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga is still 22. So those guys, to me, like, it would have for Green and Kuminga, it'd have to be next year, like in the next 12 months. But I think they have the talent to do it physically.
Yeah, I think it's time for me to punt on 5th down on Jalen Green. Finally, I've waited a little bit too long. I mean, Scoot will probably be the other guy who I just like hold on to my pre-draft evaluation for too long, and I had moments of being a little excited about Jalen Green with his preseason, the number of threes he was getting up, but the ball just hasn't gone in enough from downtown to really believe that he's going to be this sort of premium shooter. And some of these guys we're talking about, like Brandon Miller, LaMelo is shooting 35%, Jalen Green. Like, when people complain about there being too many threes, like we largely talked about that last week, John, and now we don't necessarily agree with it, but Jalen Green shooting the volume he's shooting on 32%. Brandon Miller shooting the volume he's shooting on 35%. Like, yeah, that's a better shot than a mid-ranger, and it's not a terrible shot for you in the half court on a Houston team that struggles to generate shots. But I also understand where you're just sort of like, fans could be like, yeah, like this guy's shooting 35% from 3. Like, does he need to be taking 12 per 36 or whatever ridiculous number it is? Like, I do understand that critique at least a little bit. But Sharpe, Danny, like I do want to talk about him. Just his shooting's been awful this year. He missed he had the groin surgery last year. Then it was the shoulder that he just came back from. He's only been he's played 18 games now, and he's shooting 27% on uncontested threes, and career he's at 38%. So I think that's going to come around. Just the question of like, does he provide enough in the floor game with his athleticism? Like, he's another guy like Scoot, who like Scoot has just had these flashes where at times he's made plays where like, oh, that looks like really good. Like I can still hold on to that a little bit more, but at some point again, like we're gonna have to see. I mean, the fact that the Blazers just like neither Sharpe nor Henderson, like those guys are here for the upside. They're not here because of what they've done. Like what they've done has been disappointing, and Sharpe has been part of it. Injuries have been part of it, but also he just hasn't performed so far this year, and you just have to acknowledge that. Like, as awesome as the dunks are, or some of Scoot's playmaking could be, or he gets to the rim once in a while, it looks good. Like, the Blazers are like, we hoped that both of these guys would be like in the top 10 of this list by this point, and that's just not remotely realistic.
No, I mean, Sharpe to me is like, his upside is like maybe Zach LaVine, but I just don't, like, he can't dribble. That's the biggest, like, he just doesn't get anywhere off the bounce. There's just not a lot of wiggle there. And so I think that's why he's so dependent on catch and shoot threes and highlight dunks.
John, I have something I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
Since this is going a little bit big picture, but I think this is the right time for it. I was just looking through it. Of the 12 guys that I had in these top tiers, 6 of them, exactly half, are age 23. So that means they'll graduate off this list.
Yeah.
Where does this go? Is this like, I mean, you've probably done a little bit more work on the 25 draft than we have. I don't want to necessarily get all the way there, but like, is this a true evaporation of young talent in the league?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, guys are going to move up. It seems, because that's what happens. Some of these guys will hold over to next year, but even then, those are mostly the guys at the bottom of our list too, other than Wemby.
Yeah. Who are the guys in the 22 and 23 draft that we're talking about right now? It's Victor, Paolo, and I guess Holmgren. That's it, right?
Şengün still has another year to run, doesn't he?
But he's a 20. No, Şengün is a 21. Yeah, but he's still 21 draft. I'm saying 22, 23 drafts, just not like, who are the potential the guys that you're like, yeah, these guys are on an all-star path. I mean, it's basically Victor, Paolo, Chet are the 3 guys that I think are like potential all-stars out of those 2 classes right now. Like, other guys will emerge, like you said, but in terms of just like, I feel more likely than not, these guys can be an all-star. Those are the 3.
Yeah, I think that's right. Did you say Jalen Williams?
Oh yeah, he is 22 draft. Thank you. Yeah, he's just older. That's right. Yeah, I had forgotten him. Thanks. Anyone else you guys want to hit on here? I mean, I think we can kind of wrap it up. Maybe hit a couple of comments, but
the best 23-year-old we did not mention is Tari Eason.
Yeah, I mean, Tari Eason, I think he can be a part of great teams, but it's, as a defensive monster, exactly what he's doing in Houston.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Tari. I think the player that we didn't spend enough time because we just kind of acclimated to where he was Derek Lively. Like Derek Lively being a very good center and doing so without taking a lot off the table. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I just don't see the path for him offensive. Like, I don't think he's like quite a defensive player of the year guy. Like, I think he's, fouls some, like it doesn't play as many minutes as like, I think he's kind of reliant on playing in these short bursts with Gafford. Like, I don't think he gets to the point defensively of like a Chet or a Mobley, like quite there. And then offensively, like he's always just going to be the rim running center. Maybe he does a little passing. I don't buy the shooting with him. So, unless you're going to be Rudy Gobert, you're probably not a top 8 or 9 center in the league with his offensive skill set.
Yeah,
I think he just settles into being a very good starter. So that's why he wasn't in serious consideration for the top 10 to me.
That's why I put him in the teens as well. To me, the guy I've always compared him to is Tyson Chandler. And so like that's a really good career, right? But it's not somebody who's the first or second best player on a good team.
Could Jalen Suggs, if he becomes what Derek White is right now, he might deserve to be into the top of this. Like he might actually have one of the better arguments to be in like that, the top 12, 13, the bottom of that. But he's shown a little more playmaking this year. Like he's shooting more, not making as many as he did last year, but I think he's shooting enough to where you think he'll at least be like a quality shooter going forward. Another guy is kind of being asked to do a little bit too much offensively, but like Derek White is like close to an all-star caliber player. Like I think Jalen Suggs like could kind of get there, even if he's not. Like he's just fits so well on any type of a good team.
Yeah, and we've seen that in Orlando. The decision making still can get a little tragic with Suggs off the dribble, where I think it's a little cleaner with Derek White. But in terms of an elite defensive guard who also shoots, yeah, I mean that's the thing he's becoming.
Yeah, and adding a little bit of playmaking as time goes on. And so yeah, we probably have maybe like 5 minutes left here. Do you want to just hit on some of these 24 draft guys? Like, Can I
talk about one more player we didn't mention?
Please.
Is there any belief at all in the 13 games that Jeremy Sohan has played in San Antonio this year?
I believe he's played 13 games. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's what the stat sheet says.
I just don't love him enough offensively. He plays hard. He's a good defender, but to me, that if you're not a 5, that's not enough.
Yeah, I mean, he has some similarities with Amen. Not quite the on-ball juice, but maybe even a little bit better a finisher. Like the thing that's been most intriguing is just like his aggressiveness dunking around the basket, and he can probably guard 1 through 4, maybe 5 if he fills out, but. Like it, I mean, I think he like Amen at least can be on the ball, but push it more in transition and like because Amen's passing and hand like Sohan's is sort of like intriguing forward ball handler, whereas Amen is like no, that guy is a point guard like at the lower levels. Like so that there's a big difference there, I think, in terms of the offensive upside. I also think Amen is better on defense too. So, and then like Sohan, I don't know who I think's shooting is worse between him and Amen. So, but Amen, like there's some intrigue there, but it's always going to just be a frustration that they're playing someone who can't shoot next to Victor. Like that's what's always going to be bothering me about him.
Are you saying they need to move him back to point guard?
Don't you dare, John.
Now, Nate, were you saying you wanted to discuss the 24 draft or the 25 draft of the guys who could
to 24? We limit this to players who are in the NBA. Hopefully the 25 draft will repopulate this list a little bit when we do this time next year. But I still, in my players to watch, I still had Sarr and Shepherd in that group just based on my pre-draft evaluation. Like Reed Shepherd, he's going through it right now. He's just being in a role where he hasn't had any type of freedom, but like every aspect of him has been incredibly disappointing. But I just had enough belief from Summer League. Admittedly, he was going against some other guys from this 24 draft in Summer League. We should probably keep that in mind. But my scouting evaluation, I still think that he could be an all-star. Like I'm not like his situation has just been enough where I think he's looked so bad that I almost want to discount it. Maybe that's just being too rosy. But he hasn't been featured in the way a guy would be featured, and then Sarr has been featured way too much on the other hand. But I still think the potential for his skill set, I do think he's gonna be a really solid defensive player in time. So I'm again, this is just because I think that there is some upside there. Obviously, what both of them have done this year has been atrocious.
Yeah, so one of the things with the 24 draft is that half the guys who were picked are already ineligible for this list. But in all seriousness, I'm still intrigued by Ron Holland and Stephon Castle, who had 1 and 2. Donovan Clingan has probably played the best of these guys. It's hard to buy, unless he's a true Gobert level player, it's hard to buy into him kind of moving up into the level of this list because I just don't think there's enough offense there. So that's the issue with him. And then maybe the players to watch in this draft really are Nikola Topic and Devin Carter, because they're the only two who haven't proven that they aren't top 15 guys on our list right now because they haven't played any games because they're hurt.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable that not a single guy from this draft is even a remote contender for the top 15.
And I mean, I've seen the number one guy in the draft play, a lot.
Yeah. Risa Shea is another one. Just he just hasn't been able. The only pathway for him was going to be for him to be an elite shooter. That doesn't look like he's on that path at all right now.
Yeah.
Danny, anyone else that you? I guess we're probably done here. Let's see if there's any comments that we want to hit on before we depart. Rob Dillingham, he's had a few flashes.
He was
but
the
also
last guy I was going to mention.
Okay, go ahead, Danny.
Well, it's just that he's shown a little on-ball juice, and little is a good word for him because that's the other thing he is. But I think that there's enough potential there that he could work his way in. Now, do I think it's likely? No, but we're talking more the higher end upside. Yeah, sure.
Cason Wallace is mentioned in the comments, and
no, hard no. Yeah, I just don't think there's ever enough usage there. I would go with Benedict Mathurin over Wallace, just because could Mathurin get to the point where he's averaging 25 a game? Yeah, sure. Can Cason Wallace? I don't think there's any chance. Good role player, but I just don't see him ever getting outside that box.
He has been steadily improving, and there have been a few moments where he's made some plays inside the arc this year that I've intrigued, and he's got some bounce too. He's had a couple sneaky dunks this year, that lefty one that he had in the Houston game was pretty ridiculous in transition. He hasn't had really any chance to do anything. I'm not totally ruling it out. I think and just the fact that he came in and was a starter on a playoff team basically right away does deserve at least some respect.
I can clean this one up. Yeah. Somebody said the Vassell disrespect is real. Devin Vassell's 24. He is ineligible for this conversation.
And he's also not good enough. Yeah, so let's see here. Yeah, all right. I think we're in pretty good shape here. All right, we can pack it in. I want to encourage everyone to subscribe to our free email list. You can get Dan Feldman's Daily Dunks twice per week, and of course, subscribe to Dunc'd on Prime to get even tonight. You can get our wrap up of the NBA Cup final with me and Danny. You can get, of course, every Hollinger and Duncan as well. So really enjoyed doing this. One of my favorite pods of the year, even if we did have to discuss the 2024 draft more than we wanted to. And we will talk to y'all next time. Thanks so much for listening and subscribing.